Hello and welcome to Press TV Spotlight. I'm Marcia Hashimi. Thanks so much for being with us. In the last 18 months, every war crime imaginable has been committed by the Zionist regime in Gaza. No Palestinian life is sacred to this regime, and none is spared from the genocide. From newborn babies to the elderly, and from artists to journalists to doctors, everyone is a target. On March the 23rd, at least 15 paramedics were targeted and killed by Israeli troops. Now, a video has surfaced which was taken by one of the paramedics who was killed and shows the fire trucks and ambulances were clearly marked and sirens were on, but regime troops opened fire and assassinated these rescue workers who were on a mission to help others. What type of entity targets those who are simply trying to help others? Stay with us as we look at this on the Spotlight. I'd like to welcome my guest to the program. Ranjeet Brar, vascular surgeon and leader of the British Communist Party out of London. And Batool, Subeiti, activist and political analyst out of London. Welcome both of you to the program. I'd like to start it off with in London with Ranjeet. I mean, regime officials had originally said that the vehicles were unmarked and approached in a suspicious manner. Now, the video clearly shows Israeli forces opening fire and executing aid workers, and the emergency vehicles were clearly marked. So, do you think that this will make a difference now that this video has come out? Will these horrific assassinations be condemned? Can we expect international entities to investigate what has taken place?
Thanks so much. It's good to be with you. It depends, really, what you mean by to whom will it make a difference. You know, we've seen that Israel is giving absolute indemnity to perform any atrocities and commit any atrocities by our government, by our... Are you still with me? I'm sorry, I'm having connection issues at my end.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Sorry, if you can see me, I'll carry on, but something's happening. Sorry. You can see that Israel is given absolute indemnity to commit its war crimes and atrocities. That's been the case historically for a long period of time. But throughout the whole of this episode, this genocide, we have seen successive governments, certainly in my country, in Britain, give total indemnity and impunity to the Zionist regime. Its spokesman, its leaders, Netanyahu being a particularly cynical example, but by no means alone, has been carte blanche to come on the media and denounce all of his victims as terrorists, as rapists. This is ongoing. New footage is coming almost on a daily basis. He's encouraging Trump and other governments in the West to crack down on the pro-Palestine activists. And in so doing, he's been very open, saying, who are you demonstrating for? You're demonstrating for these murderers, these rapists. And by that, it's been absolutely clear that, as his now dismissed Ben-Gvir foreign spokesman had said, we are going to treat the Palestinians that we're dealing with human animals, and we'll treat them as such. We'll cut off their food, their water, their fuel, their electricity, their medical supplies. You know, and I have watched with horror the wholesale destruction of the entire medical infrastructure of Palestine, systematic destruction of hospitals, of clinics, of healthcare workers. So this is not an isolated example. It's an egregious example from which, you know, in which the Israelis have been very clearly caught lying, caught out in their lie, and demonstrated the extent of their atrocity. But, you know, after a brief pause when it seemed that some kind of negotiation was going to happen, Netanyahu seems emboldened by Trump's message that he's free now to execute his ethnic cleansing, that this is the American plan, and he's acting for that end. So will it make a difference? Will there be investigation? I don't know what more investigation we can have when the highest international court, the ICJ, has said this is absolutely a genocide, and yet there is no enforcement, there's no action. Right. And we really see, you know, the same pattern of behavior. So it really is a question of what are the forces that can stop Israel, rather than will Israel be held to account by some kind of normal judicial process, which, as we have seen, is lacking where
right.
the Anglo-American
Well, stay with me, Ranjeet, because we're going to get into that part of it also. Let me cross over to Batool. Now, the bodies of the 15 medics and rescue workers were found in a mass grave last week. Let's talk about the absolute lack of respect in general that the regime has for Palestinians. And we have seen even bodies that have been bulldozed, mass graves just left out. What kind of entity are we talking about? I mean, it's so unbelievable, this 18 months and every day it just seems to get worse and worse. I mean, your thoughts about this, that not only do they kill in such a vicious manner, they do not even give somewhat of even respect, sometimes to even bury them, or in this case, burying in mass graves where people happened to come across this grave last week.
Absolutely. One body from the mass graves that was containing the bodies of paramedics was recovered with their hands tied and actually showed signs of severe torture. And you had one medic that even had their clothes removed and another was beheaded. So they were executed essentially at point-blank range by Israeli soldiers. It's not the case of just missiles being thrown from the sky. And as you mentioned, many of them were buried alive with even their feet bound. According to the Red Crescent, the Israeli occupation entity tried to even bury the ambulance, the civil defense, and even the UN vehicles that were present. So I think all of this just shows that Israel is a killing machine. It gloats and it considers it an achievement the more that it kills. Its philosophy is on the destruction of life. Especially the subhuman Amalek Palestinian children and babies, they don't deserve to exist. So all of this shows that Israel's goal is to kill all life in Gaza. That's why it intentionally murders paramedics and other key workers in the Strip. So this past year and a half has shown that the entity is a criminal aggressor against everything. It's not just a matter of specifically having something against paramedics or journalists per se. What about the mosques and the churches, the schools, the bakeries? What about all of those civil institutions that are of service to the people that are being indiscriminately struck? All of these civilian buildings. So Netanyahu's strategy for continuing this war is to create the most unbearable conditions for the Palestinian families through not just the killing, but also we know the knock-on effects that a state of war brings. So you have, out of the 2.2 million Palestinians, you have 1.9 million who are literally displaced. But it's not just the destruction of their homes. All of Gaza is now rubble. That includes the schools that have been relentlessly bombed. So that means kids have no education. With bakeries and stores no longer there, that means there's a lack of food. There's also a lack of clean water, which means that there's a catastrophic hunger strike. You have every kid in Gaza at risk of famine. So not only dying from the malnutrition and the dehydration, but they're completely cut off from the medical services. Hospitals are completely dysfunctional. And the killing now of key workers who would treat those wounded. So the goal over here is one, and that is to force the Palestinians to mass migrate. That's why they're unleashing hell in Gaza, in the words that Trump uses, because Israel has completely failed to achieve anything. So inflicting mass destruction, and we have to make this clear, is not a sign of strength. It's a sign that Israel cannot achieve anything with less destruction. So mass destruction is resorted to. It means it cannot use logic, it cannot resort to political means. Yet this approach has proven to be so futile because the Palestinian people have consistently rejected displacement, have remained steadfast in their land. They're really living miracles. There's no other way to put it, because the goal is to create so much hell that they would want to turn the people of Gaza against the resistance, to call for its disarmament, not realizing that the people of Gaza are the very resistance. After all of these months of relentless massacring, they will not surrender to this enemy and would rather die on their feet than live on their knees.
Right. Well, Ranjeet, let's talk about the medical staff in Gaza in general. I mean, you're a doctor. Their unbelievable dedication, that risking their lives every day, and they know that just because they're helping others, that they're even at greater risk. Your thoughts about this, being a doctor and seeing what we've seen over the last 18 months from hospitals being attacked, doctors, directors of hospitals being killed, imprisoned, tortured, disappeared. Let's talk about the targeting of the whole medical side of things in Gaza. Your thoughts on what has taken place?
Well, I think, first of all, that the targeting is specific and deliberate. We saw right at the beginning of this escalation of the genocide, and really it is a 100-year-old genocide, but this last 15 months, it was marked by the bombing of the Methodist hospital, Al-Arab Hospital, a bombing which was possibly done with a JDAM bomb, so a fuel-air explosion bunker buster type bomb, incredibly powerful, destructive means. The hospital survived, but the grounds were packed with civilians, women and children, particularly, who were sheltering, thinking this was a safe place, that a hospital had as a kind of sanctity and sacred status, even in war. That would mean that the civilian population would be safe. And it was deliberately targeted. And still, if you look up that on Wikipedia, you'll see news source after news source from around the world cut and paste there, questioning, as if we don't know who did it, we don't know how it happened. It was probably Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It was a kind of magic bullet theory, a bit like President Kennedy's association of how it could possibly have been, a friendly fire, with Palestinians who were bombing their own hospitals. And this is the kind of relentless propaganda, which is the information war that goes along with the killing spree. I do know medics from Britain who have gone out to Palestine. It's interesting, over a decade ago, I tried to get access to come and assist. It's not that Palestine doesn't have enough doctors. Palestine's got plenty of hard-working, dedicated doctors. There are Palestinian doctors I work with in Britain who are in exile and are able to return to their own land. The point is, of course, that there's a systematic strangulation of Gaza that happens that prevents them from getting the necessary supplies. And now that has become, as I said, a whole-scale and systematic targeting of the entire health infrastructure of a people. This in itself constitutes a very major war crime, but one that is given absolute impunity. It sickens me, that in the face of the crime, and really I don't consider this just an Israeli crime. I'll say everywhere to everyone who asks me, this is a British crime, this is an American crime, this is an EU crime. They are the ones who supply the weapons, they're the ones who created the State of Israel, they're the ones who continue to give it diplomatic, military, press impunity on every level. Rishi Sunak famously went over and hugged, Netanyahu and said that, of course, Israel has a right to defend itself against men, women, children, and the health infrastructure. This is what they're saying. They've sent quadcopters into hospitals who systematically shoot, nurses as well as doctors in the chest, in the operating room. These cases are documented. So there's nothing accidental. It's the deliberate message being sent that there is nowhere that is safe. Schools, mosques, hospitals, churches, food facilities, zones specifically marked out, demarcated for civilians to shelter from the alleged conflict. This is a policy of ethnic cleansing, it's a policy of genocide. And the latest example, because let's not forget, Labour Party is currently the administration in my country. Labour Party, which touts itself as some kind of socialist and progressive force, which absolutely is running the atrocities, is running the genocide, whether that's in Ukraine, Gaza, or anywhere else. And, David Lammy, who is our current Foreign Secretary, who is the MP for Tottenham, which is a poor North London neighbourhood, predominantly Afro-Caribbean neighbourhood, and he talks about it being the honour of his life to serve in this capacity, running this genocide. And he has actually, been put on record over this particular shooting, saying this is terrible, and the people accountable must be held responsible, as if it was unknown who the people accountable are. It's absolutely known, and our government, in this way, shelter the majority of the British people from understanding exactly what's happening. And that really is the information war that's going on. And in parallel with that, there's a real escalation in the repression against the Solidarity movement in order to try and beat it off the street and actually to make its demonstrations illegal.
Yes, indeed. Well, Batool, Hamas says that the video clearly proves Israeli crimes against humanitarian workers and contradicts the Zionist version of what happened. It also says that the video is irrefutable visual evidence which exposes Israel's lies, proves the systematic targeting of humanitarian workers, and constitutes premeditated murder under international law. Do you agree with this statement of Hamas? And if so, each one of these are considered war crimes. And again, it is as if it means nothing at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I don't think anyone disagrees with that, not even the Israeli occupation entity itself, as your guest rightly alluded. I mean, they come out and they say these words in the open, that every Palestinian is a target, they're human animals, they're Amalek. The goal is to create a situation in which Gaza is completely unlivable, to force the Palestinians to mass migrate. So there's no hope of life in Gaza. That's why they're unleashing all of this hell in Gaza. So that's absolutely something that I don't think anyone can refute. And it's something that these past 18 months has put to the test. In terms of what this amounts to, of course, international law does not apply to the Israeli occupation entity because it is protected by America unconditionally. And these past 19 months have shown the dirty face of the capitalist structure that is ruling the world and has really removed those masks of deception, because such a scale of atrocity has not happened since World War II. All the conventions and all of the agreements to prevent such a genocide from happening have shown to be complete lies in front of the real tests that we are seeing materially on the ground. I mean, this all goes back to the formation of the occupation entity in 1948, and everything by extension linked to it is the biggest shame for the whole world, because the world superpowers were the ones who conspired to uproot the Palestinians, and the whole world turned a blind eye to it, and the whole world is essentially covering it right now. And there's even an outcry and a punishment on anyone who tries to resist. I mean, look at the relentless bombing of Yemen, for example. There is a price to be paid by the resistance countries who intervene with the condition of a ceasefire. That's all they're calling for. Yemen right now is saying all we want is a ceasefire to be achieved, and then we'll stop bombing the ships. We'll stop the targeting of the ships. And also look at how individuals are criminalized and censored in countries in the West. So this ethnic cleansing is ongoing, and the numbers killed and wounded is something that is unprecedented. And I would argue ultimately the vast majority of the world is sleeping and not giving except a little. But once public opinion changes, and it is changing, and calls for intervention become effective, then I think that is the only factor that will kind of make, the governments of the West give, shy announcements in front of this huge level of unprecedented genocide, such as allowing the humanitarian aid at the most minimal level, and getting people used to this low rate of Palestinian killing. I guess the upheaval in the world reaction happens when, again, people wake up to the fact that over 100 Palestinians are killed on a day, or human bodies are flying at a certain altitude. People are used to hearing a certain level of killing, and when it goes above that, that's when public opinion riles up more. But in any case, all of this would only lead to partial interventions, and then it will go back to normal. Because the hope, I think, on an international front won't come from these governments, but it will come from the people who form that resistance front globally.
Right.
And that is all people rising up and saying enough is enough. Every person has a fight in their respective dominion, but it won't come without a price, because that's the way the system's been set up. You will face resistance if you speak up.
Right. Well, Ranjeet, where is the outcry from the doctors and others who work in medical facilities worldwide? I mean, from the beginning of this genocide, as you said, about the hospitals and how they were targeted, I mean, where's the solidarity campaigns? What's happening with doctors worldwide, nurses worldwide, paramedics worldwide? Why aren't we seeing more of an outcry from them?
Very interesting question, and I don't know if you've got time for me to fully explore it on the program. Your last guest made a lot of interesting points, but I would disagree with her on one thing, and that is, this isn't an unprecedented genocide. I would put it to you that it's the stock in trade of Western imperialism to commit these genocides in order to enforce its rule and to loot the entire globe. The entire history of Africa, Asia, Latin America is replete with these genocides. Even North America, if you go just a few hundred years back in history, certainly since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, when Anglo-American imperialists, when the NATO powers felt themselves to be, without opposition, when they felt their unipolar moment had arrived, they've been on a rampage across the globe of new colonial wars. And that means Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Yemen, as you rightly pointed out. We could keep going. The level of their atrocities is enormous. The way they've been able to get away with it is because that they still make enough profits from the looting of the entire world to, relatively speaking, elevate the standard of life of workers like myself in the imperialist heartlands. And so they've used two methods. One is the carrot, one is the stick. At the moment, they're going through a deep economic crisis. And so the carrot, the level of bribery, the good life that they can give to workers in the West is decreasing. And so they are relying increasingly upon the stick. And I think, we're not powerless. There are examples. You have to go back quite a long way in history when the workers of imperialist countries have stopped their own ruling class from waging wars. They are ultimately the people who operate the war machine, operate the press, operate every aspect of society. Capitalists give the orders, they pay the wages, but workers have to consent to it. They've taken a great deal of trouble in order to buy off the political leadership of the working class. The Labour Party is the case in point. People think of it as a workers' party. It's a party of imperialism, but it's gone further than that. They've bought off and essentially controlled the trade union Congress movement, which, generally speaking, can be mobilized. When the Labour Party give the word, that will direct most of the opposition. And then if we look further, even the Stop the War movement, the Palestine Solidarity campaign in our country, they're deeply linked to the Labour Party, which limits the extent of their effectiveness of their opposition. So in terms of the medical, if you come just right back to why don't doctors? Doctors were encouraged because it was the establishment policy to give solidarity with doctors in Ukraine, even though that was a NATO war in which the fascists had been installed in order to batter Russia. I don't want to get off the topic, but the reverse was the case. What Palestine Solidarity campaigners can see, there's such a glaring difference. Emails were sent around in my hospital encouraging me to donate, to buy weapons, helmets, all kinds of things for the Ukrainian people to fight Russians. But if I speak out, if people wear badges supporting Palestine, if they wear kafir, if they speak words in favor of Palestine in their hospitals, they are sent for disciplinary action. There are hundreds, tens of hundreds, well, not quite thousands, there are hundreds of doctors I know of who have been reported. And there's a strict regulatory framework and kind of a political policing that's been put in action. I myself was at demonstration, was called out by Zionists working in conjunction with the police at the orders of our cabinet-level government politicians in order to try and criminalize me. One instance on a charge of being a racist, on one instance on a charge of being a terrorist, and subsequent to that, the police contacted the regulatory authority, the General Medical Council, the people who, without whose recognition, I can't practice as a doctor, I can't hold a license to practice medicine, and then tried to put me through a regulatory process which was drawn out over a year, which tried to strike me off as a doctor. Now, others have worked from the other end. They've been taken simply on the end of their social media, initially reported by groups such as the Jewish Medical Association, which actually is a branch of the Israeli Medical Association, groups like Harry's Place, groups like Nasher Jew, and there are a whole number of them, and some of them, of course, working very closely with governments such as the Community Security Trust and others. They're a very organized, coordinated group that have been taken to the heart of British imperialism and work actually as a level of political policing. And so therefore, actually, there's a great deal of support for Palestine, but it's being censored.
Suppressed.
Being deeply censored.
I'm sorry, because we're just about out of time. Just really quickly, Batool, based on what Ranjeet said, I mean, it just seems like the control is growing in the West over the people to try to suppress them for not even trying to show any type of solidarity. But you said earlier, despite all of that, you feel that the people are waking up. 30 seconds, Batool.
Absolutely. I think the hope on an international front comes from that resistance front globally. That is, all people of nations rising up against the occupation entity and saying that this is too much of a burden on our souls to bear. Every person has a fight in their respective dominion, whether that's fighting the disinformation war, if you're a student at university in the West calling for divestment campaigns, ramping up the shutting down of weapons factories through civil disobedience, challenging in the workplace. The stain is on every individual institution, on every individual who remains silent, because if we remain silent, it means we've legitimized it. And if we've legitimized it, it means that there are zero red lines and there are zero values, because what occurs in Gaza can effectively occur anywhere else in the world. Yes, speaking up comes with a price, but there's a greater price to pay with silence against all of humanity.
All right, and on that note, I thank both of you for being with me. Ranjeet Brar, vascular surgeon and leader of the British Communist Party out of London, and Batool Subeiti, activist and political analyst, also out of London. And thank you, viewers, for being with us on another Spotlight. I'm Marcia Hashimi. Hope to see you right here next time. Goodbye.